everyone. This is presentation on the founder of Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard. I'm presenting as Mark, and it's just going to be a slideshow showing how Yvon and his employees stick to the principles of servant leadership as set out by Robert Greenleaf. So Lao Tzu was a philosopher who said that the greatest leader is one who is willing to serve. Introduction and history. Yvon was born in Maine in 1938, and his family eventually moved down to Southern California, where he developed a passion for falconry and the outdoors. This passion eventually led to the foundation of the Chouinard equipment, which later morphed into the Patagonia that we know today. Yvon Chouinard made a partnership with a gentleman called Tom Frost in 1965, and this is what developed into Chouinard equipment. The, like I said in the previous slide, this partnership eventually led up to the foundation of Patagonia. Most of the items that were available on the market at that time for climbing gear were not really durable, and they were not really as good quality as what Chouinard equipment was making, and this is why they were able to like break into the market and get a niche of customers that were willing to pay extra for their stuff. And in the persuasion slide, it talks about how Yvon was able to sell his equipment for about $1.50, and yet the European quality was selling for about 20 cents. So he was able to sell his equipment for at a much higher price because of the quality that he was using to make the equipment. So what is servant leadership? Jesus defines servant leader in his quote from Matthew chapter 20, verse 26 to 28, where he says, "Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So this is a great example of what it means to be a servant leader. You have to be willing to serve people. You have to be willing to meet people where they come from. You have to be willing to go to the bottom so you can be on top. When people understand that you're able to meet them at their needs, even the most critical, dire needs that most people would not take to be something to be attended to. So a servant leader actually goes deep down, dives deep down to help people, to serve people, to actually go out into the community and listen to people, listen to their needs. And this is what Jesus defines as a servant leader. Now, Robert Greenleaf views servant leadership as a willingness to serve first before being a leader, which is basically a summary of Matthew 26 to 28, chapter 20, verse 26 to 28. So Larry Spears' summary on Greenleaf's 10 servant leadership characteristics. So there are 10 characteristics of servant leadership that Greenleaf talks about and that Larry Spears summarizes. The first one is the ability to listen. The second one is empathy. The third is healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to growth of people, and building community for the betterment of the people and the environment. Listening. As you can see, the best democracy exists when decisions are made through consensus. And consensus involves listening. When you can listen to what people are trying to tell you, when you can listen to what your customers want, when you can listen to what your employees want, when you can listen to what your stakeholders and your trustees and the people that sit on the board want, you're able to develop a relationship and an environment of trust where you can actually solve problems in a much more efficient way. I think that would be the best way to define the slide of listening. The second point is empathy. Empathy is defined as the imaginative projection of an individual's consciousness into another and feeling what they would feel in your situation. So empathy is basically trying to fulfill the golden rule. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. So Patagonia understood that its employees are parents. Not only are they workers for the company, but they're also parents. And they did not want parents having to drive all the way to pick their children for daycare or employ nannies or extended, what they would call external daycare providers. So Patagonia decides to set up on-site daycare, but it's only for 8 weeks and older, babies that are 8 weeks and older. The ones that are younger than 8 weeks could not be taken care of by a facility. So they came up with the decision and look, we put ourselves in your shoes and we know that you can't make money for 8 weeks. So we'll give you an 8-week paid leave so you can get your infant up to the level where the company can actually start taking in children for on-site daycare. So the fact that Patagonia was willing to give their employees paid maternity and paternity leave, and even for the 8 weeks that the infant, from the time the infant is born to the actual 2 months where the company can start doing on-site care, is an example of Patagonia having empathy for the people that work for them, being able to put yourself in their shoes and being able to understand that a child at a young age needs a parent, and a parent cannot just decide to go to work in the name of making money and leaving a child out of their care. So Patagonia actually empathizes with the parents and empathizes with the fact that these are not just workers, but they're actually human beings. And also the babies have to have some kind of initial relationship with the parent. Another example would be allowing mothers to actually breastfeed their babies on site instead of using bottle feeding methods. That's another example of empathy, like empathizing between the mother and the baby. Healing. The other characteristic of servant leadership is healing. Now, healing is the main theme in Patagonia. Let my people go surfing. This is the main theme in him writing the book. The environment that we operate in, the environment that most industries operate in, needs healing. And we have to produce and consume in a way that helps the planet heal. Because without the planet, we cannot have people, we cannot have business. The other example of healing comes from the Klamath River Dam story, where the Yurok tribe that lives there was actually given federal protection, and the land could actually be used for fishing, water rights, hunting. Yeah, so fishing, hunting, and water rights. So the federal government later on started harassing some of the fishermen that were actually just doing and living their lifestyle. So Patagonia tried to help some of these people actually regain back their right to use the land and the water. And the Klamath River Dam had to be blown up so the salmon in the river could be able to regenerate organically, because the dam was actually affecting a lot of the organic life that was naturally that had been passed on from previous generations, and it was making it hard for people to actually do their fishing in a sustainable way. There was a lot of chemical and overflow that was coming from, I think, some of the agricultural products that were being done upstream. Most of these were from industrialized farming projects, so it was affecting the salmon, it was affecting the lifestyle of Europe tribe. So they had to make a petition with the government in Washington, and they were given the right to actually blow up the Klamath River Dam. And this is seen from the Undammed Patagonia activism webpage. Awareness. The importance of being aware of where your raw materials are sourced and how they're produced and the effects the conversion process. So basically turning a raw material into a finished good. What does that involve? Are you aware of the environmental effects, of the human health effects that come from converting a raw material into the finished good? Is it better to source your raw materials from farmers, or is it better to recycle? So Patagonia was aware of the fact that most of the cotton that they were buying was actually being treated with chemicals like formaldehyde that was affecting the workers at the ginnery. So they had to switch to organically grown cotton that was less harmful to the health of the workers, although most other companies were still sticking to the conventional cotton that involved chemical and pesticides. Now it is much easier to treat cotton with chemicals and pesticides as it saves companies on the money for labor and the money that is involved in converting the cotton from the farm to actual spinning in the ginnery. But Patagonia decided to actually do organically grown cotton despite the hardships involved in like taking out the seeds and the stems and all the debris that you find in cotton to like make it from the farm to the finished product. So Patagonia was willing to make that sacrifice because they had the awareness of the positives that come from organically grown cotton. Another example of awareness is being aware of the change that civil democracy has to change events in the course of history and not waiting on governments and politicians to do it. We, as consumers, as private citizens, we have the civic duty to cause change, to actually make companies change the way they do their business. And this can be seen when Patagonia partners up with small organizations and tribal communities to make sure that companies are respecting their land, respecting their ecosystem, and respecting their communities. So the awareness of about the change that civil democracy can bring, and not just thinking that, oh, we can't change anything, we're waiting for the government to do it. No, it's the people that actually do it. And Yvon talks about this in his video, the YouTube video in the UCTV, about how slavery was not really about Abraham Lincoln stopping slavery. It was the work of unknown people, people that we don't really talk about, that started the Underground Railroads, that knew that the institution of slavery was not right. And they made the effort to try and make sure that slavery ended. And these interconnected networks of people, small groups of people, or what you would call the civil democracy, were able to cause the institution of slavery to come down. Because when people realize that something is not right over time, as the idea grows and the awareness is able to like penetrate through society, change is able to come about. It's the bushfires that we set, the small bushfires for change, that helps change to come about. It's not the government that brings change. It's not political parties that bring change. It's not companies that bring change. It's not the big businesses that are going to bring change. It's the people that consume the products that are going to bring change. And that's where awareness comes in, into this point. So persuasion is the ability to get someone to believe you, to believe your idea, to believe your mission, to believe in something that you're selling them. It could be a service, it could be a product, it could even be an idea. So persuasion in terms of servant leadership is, are you able to persuade people to follow your idea, to follow what you're selling? Like, look guys, I have equipment for climbing, and instead of buying that, why don't you buy my product? And this is where Yvon was able to basically show the quality of persuasion in servant leadership. He had the ability to persuade people to initially pay $1.50 for his pitons compared to the 20 cents for the European-made pitons because persuasion of better climbing experience for the extra price. You want safety when you're climbing. You want to be guaranteed that the equipment that you're using is actually going to be durable and last long, and you're not going to have to buy it all the time. And that's just why his equipment was much higher priced than the stuff that was on the market at that time. Conceptualization. So conceptualization is a concept that you understand why you're in business. And Yvon Chouinard was able to conceptualize the point of Patagonia and why Patagonia was set up. And, the vision for Patagonia. So he says that businesses are ultimately responsible to the environment in which they operate because without the environment, you can't have shareholders, employees, and customers. If any business that is being set up is able to conceptualize on this point, then we would understand the need to take care of the environment that we're doing business in. And then the second point he makes that is kind of connected to conceptualization is leaders have to take risks, have long-term vision, and create the strategic plans and instigate change. Change is part of conceptualization because change is a part of life. And companies and businesses and governments and institutions and organizations that are not willing to change, that are not willing to accept that change is a constant in life, usually are not going to be able to weather the storms that come from the shocks and the advancements in technology, in science, and in basically ideas that come about with the turn of every decade or century. Foresight. Foresight involves thinking long term about the future and has an element of sustainability. And the book about Patagonia, Let My People Go Surfing, really revolves around sustainability, environmental sustainability. The whole idea of recycling clothes, of switching from conventional cotton to organic grown cotton. Those are all examples of foresight that can be seen from the book and also from the video where the CEO is being interviewed, which I want to talk about in the next slide. So in one of the videos about the green interview and reinventing the world, Yvon talks about how technology might be a cause for good, but if it's not well regulated, it might take human beings out of work. Now, he talks about technology in terms of agriculture and how agriculture has become mechanized. In the short term, it's a good thing because we can produce a lot more food, a lot more vegetables, a lot more cereal and corn to feed the world with less labor intensive mechanisms. But in the long term, it puts people out of work. And then there are certain things that people can do in a much more sustainable way that if we were to use machinery and chemicals would affect the environment. So yes, as much as mechanization of agriculture is a good thing, it involves a lot of unsustainable practices like the idea of conventional cotton and how formaldehyde is used. Formaldehyde is a chemical that is very, very, very harmful and dangerous, both to human consumption, to human health, and also to the environment. But if human beings were actually involved in the picking, the drying, and the ginning of the cotton using their hands, it would be much more labor intensive and it would cost the company a lot more to produce the product and they would have to sell their product at a premium. But the customers would understand that, hey, look, I'm paying a premium for this cotton product because I know that it was organically produced and it was sustainably produced. And when I pay this premium for this product, it's going to go back to the farmer, it's going to go back to the factory worker that produced this cotton in a much more sustainable way than another company that just produces cheap clothes and they tell you it's 100% cotton, but they're not telling you about the dyes, they're not telling you about the conventional chemicals that are used to grow that product. So sometimes cheap is not always good. And this is also seen when he talks about the Hawaiian shirt. You can get the Hawaiian shirt for like $10, or you can get the Hawaiian shirt for $300. But the difference is in the design. You can just tell from the design. That was a very good example again from the video. Mr. Ryan Geller talks about foresight when Patagonia makes a switch from conventionally grown cotton to organically produced cotton. This is a point that I talked about in the previous slide. And then also Patagonia has a buyback program. So if you're not using some of the gear that you bought maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago because it's not in fashion, you can take it to any Patagonia office or you can mail it in and they'll buy it back from you, evaluate it, give it some value and send you something in the mail. Or you can exchange it for something, you can trade it in for something. So the buyback program guarantees that the clothes that people are not using are not just thrown away or given away to organizations that may not necessarily have a sustainable way of dealing with clothes that are not wanted. So they get these clothes, they recycle them, and then they produce new products from the clothes that are recycled. And this ensures that we have a sustainable way of producing our clothes. Stewardship in terms of Patagonia's drive towards stewardship has to deal with environmental stewardship, and Patagonia has done a really good job when it comes to environmental stewardship because they donate about 10% of their profits before taxes to go towards causes that are based on environmental awareness and saving the planet from climate change. So this would be a very good example of environmental stewardship. Fair trade. Patagonia is a member of fair trade organizations that give back close to about $200 million back to workers, the factory workers and the farmers that produce their products. The fair trade involves, companies have to be fair in the way that they produce their stuff. They should not exploit the workers, and they should not exploit the environment. Which comes back to the point of commitment to growth of people. When you're committed to the growth of people, you don't just use them as a means to an end. You actually value their intrinsic value. You see them for something much more than just being workers or just being consumers. You actually see them as human beings. And that is why Patagonia has this, premiums that it gives back to the communities that produce the raw materials, like the farmers and the factory workers that process the raw materials. This is a lot of money that Patagonia would just be using to give to their shareholders and to pay their CEOs and all the employees in the company, but they give it back to the people. And this is a very good commitment to the growth of people. So continuing on to Patagonia's commitment to the growth of people. Now, Patagonia Stories tells us about an initiative that the company created called the Home Planet Fund, which works with local indigenous communities to find local solutions to complex climate change problems. Now, climate change affects every community around the world differently. There are people in the northern hemisphere and the people in the southern hemisphere are affected by climate change in different ways. And it's mostly the indigenous communities that have nothing to do with the climate change crisis that are being affected by mostly countries from the global north because of the heavy industrialization and heavy machinery and industry that are causing most of the climate change effects to seep down into the global south. So Patagonia set up the Home Planet Fund, which receives donations from people around the world to help a lot of these communities find sustainable solutions to the climate change crisis that we're having. And this is a very good example of how Patagonia is committed to the growth of people. And then the last point is about building community. Patagonia has helped build and preserve the community-based ecosystem as seen from the way they defended I think it's the Haisla people from having part of their forest taken away by a company called Eurocan that wanted to carry out logging activities and bribe the indigenous folks to give away their land and their resources. So Patagonia stepped up their environmental activism efforts and they partnered with I think it's the Haisla tribe, and they were able to beat the case in court and the company had to give back all the land and all the tree and forest cover back to the Isla indigenous people. So this is a way that Patagonia is trying to preserve and build community for the betterment of humanity and the environment at large. Conclusion. Yvon Chouinard does a great job trying to show us that we need to change the approach of business from profits only to more giving back to the communities that consume and produce the products that businesses are turning out to people, and also being more mindful and empathetic and conscious about the effects of the stuff we consume and where it actually comes from.